When you think about telling stories, I think about your amazing book.
Love it.
Queen of the shameless plug, better than me. I don't even know where the book is.
Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Hi everyone, it's me, Krylios, Team Rayceen Productions MC and producer, and joining me as usual is the wonderful goddess of DC, Rayceen Pendarvis. Hey Rayceen.
Hey, my love, greetings and salutations to everyone. We are here with this amazing young man, so I'm going to have him introduce himself.
I'm Eric Cervini. Thanks for having me.
Of course, and Eric is a wonderful author and historian, and we're so pleased to have you here with us chatting with Rayceen and myself. Now, to start this off, give our audience a little bit about your background and how, you started writing and how important LGBTQ history is to you and what you do.
It's a great question because I think so many people who may be interested in American history or world history, even in high school or even in college, even if they're gay or queer or part of the community, they still haven't been taught about their own past. Yeah. And I realized that pretty early on in college. I came out right before I went to college and thought I wanted to be a lawyer. I thought I wanted to go work in the government or something. And then watched the film Milk about Harvey Milk.
Yes.
Which it's a great film. And I was just shocked that I had never heard the story before. Mm-hmm. One of, the most incredible, inspiring, but also tragic stories in American history. And I hadn't been taught it. So it made me wonder what other stories are out there that have not been taught in American public schools, in colleges, that tell us who we are as part of the queer community, because we have to study our past in order to understand who we are today.
Definitely. Thank you so much for that.
And that's so important. And when you think about telling stories, I think about your amazing book.
Love it.
Queen of the shameless plug, better than me. I don't even know where the book is.
Listen, the queen of the shameless plug.
I don't even know where that's how bad I am. So I have everything to learn from you. So thank you.
You're more than welcome. And talking about this book, how did the name come about?
Well, part of it, I'll be honest, part of it, I wanted to get people's attention, right? Mm-hmm. Because, so many other history books are, the gay rights battle or, these rainbow flags in front of the Supreme Court. And I wanted people to realize, actually, the history goes back a lot farther than, the Supreme Court rulings, even farther than Stonewall. And one of the words that the government used, and it originally came from psychiatrists, to describe not just gay people, but anyone who we would now identify as LGBT or queer. They didn't really use those terms back then, but one of the words that was actually pretty inclusive, even though it was derogatory, was deviant. And, I thought that was important rather than saying Frank Kameni's war, he's the main character in the book. It's not really about him. He's the through line throughout it, but it's really the story of America and also the queer community developing pride. And so I wanted to make it clear that even though a lot of the book is about him, it's also telling a much larger story about what it means and what it meant to be a sexual deviant and in the 50s and 60s and how we first fought back.
Of course, and I find it really interesting that you use the word homosexual, homosexual versus United States of America, because one, it captures the speaking of the time. We're not saying we don't use homosexual today,
right?
But that was the thing. And for me personally, my parents used the word homosexual all the time. Really? And I think politically, many homosexual people use gay or queer or whichever thing currently, but homosexual has always had almost this clinical sound
Totally.
to it. You know what I mean? It's very that, and it defines you by your sexuality as well. And so I think that was a very prescient word to use for the book. Now, within your book, you discuss a lot of stuff, and I know that for many people, they're queer or cis hetero, that they'll probably never know before. And one of my favorite parts about it is exploring gay life and the gay world before Stonewall happened, because many people look at stuff from afterwards. And so things like the Mattachine Society in DC and, different things all over. And I find that really, really interesting because I've been to Fire Island a couple of times. And when I'm there, well, the friend who I stay with when I'm there, they have this book from that has like pictures and stories from before Stonewall, right? And after, so like early 60s and things afterwards. And just seeing that is like really, really just amazing to me, just to see, the gay people at the time. So tell me about the research that went into this book for you and why it was important to capture, all the things leading up to Stonewall. And also tell me why through Frank Kameni's lens.
Well, one of the easiest things for me as a historian is I was very lucky that Frank Kameni kept virtually every single letter that he ever sent or received. And because he had never had a book written about him before, I thought, well, this is a really good way to tell a larger story using some of his records that have never been explored before. But I think what's also important, and what I try to do in the book, is to bring in some of the other characters who influenced him or who were influenced by him. So, for example, Bayard Rustin, who was the architect of the March on Washington in 1963, a gay Black man. We should be telling stories about him too, and also showing how the chief role of Frank Kameni was replicating, copying the exact tactics of the Black freedom movement and applying them to the gay rights movement. And this was happening years before Stonewall. And don't get me wrong, Stonewall is essential. It took some of this activism that was really confined in these tiny, usually white, usually male-dominated organizations, and it made it applicable and accessible to everyone. And so you have a huge explosion in size. But we have to also talk about the relationship between the Black freedom movement and the homophile movement, whether it's Black is beautiful becoming eventually gay is good. And I think you have to tell that long story and also look at how Frank Kameni and the homophile movement made a lot of mistakes, right? They were mostly white, mostly men, and learn, where did that come from? How does maybe the politics of respectability, as we call it, keep the movement small, and how do we prevent that from happening again today?
And that's so important. History is so important. I feel like sometimes many young people who are just coming out in the LGBTQIA community feel like their journey is the only journey. And if you don't know where you're going, you have to understand where you've been. And it is important that this book, the full spectrum from the 1900s all the way up to today is so important, because it tells, one, it lets people know we've been here a long time.
Exactly.
And and we're not going anywhere, and we're here, we're queer, get over it.
Yes.
And, and it's like, and I just thank you for being this young man who has really took it upon himself to say, it's so important that I tell this story beyond the walls of Stonewall. Like why that is so important and why it is so important now and so relevant in today, tomorrow, and our future. Someone will pick this book up in 2025 and just be so enlightened. Some young person in Kansas, Nebraska, Idaho, in places where unfortunately sometimes they don't are fully respected in communities such as cities like San Francisco, the Castro, DuPont Circle, Market Street, all of those amazing places where cities have our own groups and communities where we reign supreme. But it's not like that for everyone. But so when someone will pick up this book and they will be like, oh my goodness, it's so important to know that they have a voice before them, they have a voice now, and they matter. And it's so important that this book, you know, I see it actually, it'll probably be used in school someday. You know?
I would love that. Honestly, definitely, I would love that. Yes, and I think that would be really important. You know, Rayceen and Eric, I just chatted with a professor from Howard, and he is teaching the first gay Black gay history courses at Howard University. Yes, he is. And so when the new school year begins, that will be the second year of that happening. And so when I was at Howard, in our LGBT organization, that's the Coalition of Activist Students Celebrating the Acceptance of Diversity and Equality, Cascade for short, Cascade for short, which is the first LGBTQ organization at any historically Black college or university. We have been trying to get this for a long time, make it a minor, a major. And so now that I'm no longer there, I'm glad to see that our work has, you know, finally come to fruition and to see that happening. So I say all of that to say that, yes, I would love to see this as a textbook, that, you know, this book can be used to be taught in courses like that, you know, and it would just be so enriching. I wish I would have gotten the opportunity to do that in school, for example. And I don't want to forget his name since I mentioned him. It's Professor Ravi Perry at Howard University. Now, but speaking of things moving forward as well, we just saw that Stephen Cannells, the co-creator of Pose, that he is on his way of making a new limited series about Frank Kameny. Tell me how you feel about that.
I am so excited. First of all, congratulations to you on that class and getting that. And it's a class I want to take because one thing I always try to tell people about history and about studying it is that you never know it all, right?
Yeah.
There's always more to learn. And even I have a PhD in history. I'm sure if I took that class, I would not know 90% of it. Because there's always more to learn no matter what stage of your career or your life you're at. So I'm so excited that you're providing that, and it's such an important contribution to the field. So thank you for doing that as a historian, for fighting for that. And I'm so grateful and so excited. I'm gonna have to reach out to him and maybe interview him myself.
Yes.
But anyway, let's talk about Pose first of all. What an unbelievable show. I do not think that anyone other than Stephen Cannells is better equipped to tell stories of our past, and especially the trans women of color on that show are so inspirational. I have to first say that because I think they didn't get the credit that they deserve. And
the Emmy nominations were just yesterday, 2 days ago, and only the cis Black guy got it.
So I want to say that show has done so much, not just in entertainment, but in the telling of history also, and giving voices.
Because sometimes it's not about the awards given; it's about the legacy they leave. Right. That will be a legacy of what they have been a part of. It's creating something that has never been done before.
Exactly. Right. The show itself is making history, right? It's telling history and making history at the same time, which is so important. And, you know, I think given the fact that it's done so well and has done it so beautifully, just tells me that there is, you know, I'm so thrilled for this new project about not just Frank Kameny, but also Barbara Gittings.
Yes.
Was, you know, side by side with him, and really was the one who was, you know, Frank Kameny would get all upset and yelling and calling people names and stuff, and Barbara Gittings would say, let's get back to work. Let's get more focused on the strategy. And I'm so grateful also as a historian because my book ends in 1971. And that story, I had the privilege of seeing and helping with the documentary that it's based on. It begins really in 1971, that fight. Yeah, so I kind of think of it as the perfect pairing to the book. So read the book and watch the series. You'll get the full experience.
Wonderful, wonderful. I love that so much. Now, I want to find out from you, comparing the fights that the queer community has done in the past for equal rights, and comparing it to now and the fights that we are going through currently. One, how would you compare them? And two, what do you think are the next things on the agenda that we are barreling towards?
I think it's a great question. And I actually think what you saw last month in June with the explosion in size and scope of Black Lives Matter is very similar to what happened in June of 1969, 51 years earlier, with Stonewall, because Black Lives Matter as a movement existed before this year, right? There have been organizations doing the hard work for so long. But then with the murder of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, these exploded the movement in size and made people like me, all my cis white gay friends finally start talking about it, right? And so that's a very similar phenomenon that happened in June of 1969 at Stonewall. You had a movement that already existed that was very radical. And then you have this really tangible, salient moment that gets covered in the news, that inspires people, and it explodes the movement in size. And now what we have to do is say, all right, we have this momentum. How do we keep it going? And also, who are we forgetting? Right? Because what happened after Stonewall, even though it was trans women of color leading the battle and putting their lives on the line, they were the first to be forgotten.
Yes.
And so I want to prevent that, what happened to Marsha P. Johnson and what happened to Sylvia Rivera in 1970, from happening now, especially with Black trans women who are being murdered at horrific rates. And I, especially as a cis gay white guy, want to be amplifying some of the organizations that have been doing the hard work, whether it's Casa Ruby in Washington, D.C., the Sylvia Rivera Law Center in New York, Marsha P. Johnson Institute, all these incredible organizations that have been doing the hard work for so long. And now finally, I and my friends are finally kind of waking up, right? And we're talking about it and having these conversations, and also doing that on social media, which I think is so important, because finally, rather than just selfies, we're talking about really important things, finally.
Yeah, definitely. And before I even let you go, I do want to talk a little bit about that moment that in the book where we basically get a breakdown of Stonewall. Because I mean, for many people, we've heard about it for a long time. There's some gay people, they even just know the word Stonewall, but don't even really know what happened. I remember I saw this video with these drag queens, Willem and Derek Barry from Drag Race.
So and people getting killed at Stonewall?
Yeah, and Derek said, people got killed. And Willem said, no one died.
And didn't realize that we've had to fight for it, and now they are starting to realize that we still have to fight.
Like when people don't know what Stonewall is, you know what I mean?
Why don't you tell everybody what that is?
That was fighting for gay rights, and people were killed.
Nobody was killed at Stonewall.
Nobody was killed?
Nobody was killed at Stonewall.
No one died at Stonewall. So it's like that, there are many, many people who, they have an idea, but they don't really know. And in your book, you give a full breakdown. There's this one part that sticks out to me, and I saw it on your Twitter, when someone said, everyone says Marsha P. Johnson threw the first brick, but in the book it says, girl, she was on top of the police car with a bag of bricks, honey. She broke the windshield. I was like, oh, girl, I'm living.
In high heels. In high
heels and a tight dress. Listen, iconic. And I think that moment, people are really, what was it like for you seeing, that, researching and seeing that behind the scenes, full account of Stonewall?
Yeah, well, so it's important to realize there were violent acts of resistance before Stonewall. whether it was Compton's Cafeteria in 1966, Cooper's Donuts in 1959, you have this resistance. What made Stonewall different was there were two Village Voice reporters who were there that actually were not just outside the bar, but also inside the bar with the police officers as they were barricading themselves inside the bar against these flaming queens, bent on vendetta, right, as they write. And so they see, and that was probably the most exciting part of it. And anyone can go, all the Village Voice archives are, maybe I'll post it on Twitter or something. You can read the actual articles from these reporters who were there, and they talk about the fear in these police officers' eyes. And also, the one thing about who was Willem correcting? Who was the drag queen?
Derek Barry.
It was Derek.
Yes, Derek. Of course, it was Derek. Of course, it's Derek.
I'm gonna get in trouble, but yeah.
I love Derek to death, though. You know, love her.
Yeah. So, but in Derek's defense, it was very close to becoming a massacre, and that's one thing that especially as we talk about police brutality now. The fact that it was within seconds of the police officers shooting into the crowd at Stonewall. And also it was the result of anti-trans and anti-gender non-conforming policies. If you looked like me at the Stonewall and you were just a cis gay white guy, you got to just show your ID and go outside and kiki, right? It was the people who are not conforming to gender norms who were arrested, who were sexually assaulted by the police officers at Stonewall, and who were the ones carried away and taken to jail. And so I think we have to talk about that, and we have to talk about this was an act of police brutality. And it just goes to show that what we're experiencing now in 2020 is not new, right? Yeah. This is something that folks have been having to put up with for so long, and finally now we're talking about it, because not only do we have reporters, we have iPhones, right, to actually record what's going on.
I think what happens with any situation, when people are oppressed and it begins to become over and over and over again, when people are put in situations where they cannot take anymore, where enough is enough, where people realize that could be my son, that could be my daughter, that could be my child, that could be my brother, that could be my coworker. When people start to see it, it then becomes something in their psyche, awakens. Yep. And then they realize, there go the grace of God, go I. And then they understand what people who have been oppressed for so long have endured in this country for centuries, you know, and it's so sad. But all of those situations, Stonewall, the Black Lives movements, the situations that are occurring all across the country, and will probably come again when we're gone, because we know the cycle of life.
The more things change, the more they stay the same.
People will get tired of being oppressed, put down, hurt, killed, beaten, just for living their truth. So it begins awakening in people, and that awakening begins to change. And then it begins through that change, protests, marches, organizations become aware, folks start filming, and then people start understanding that this can no longer happen anymore.
Definitely, definitely. Before we go, Eric, I would love for you to let our audience know where they can get your book and how they can follow you on all forms of social media.
Thank you so much. And before I do that, Rayceen, I have to say, you capture that phenomenon more beautifully than anyone I know. To this day, I still get messages and emails about your poetry at our first event.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. So I cannot wait. I tell them to stay tuned for your own book of poetry, which I am so excited about, because let me tell you, even my own mother called me up afterwards and she said, Eric, that poem, I'm in tears. I don't think there was a dry eye of anyone watching. I know you couldn't see it because it was over Zoom, but thank you for sharing that. I have to say, I meant to say it earlier, and also thank you for sharing it with us.
Thank you for taking the time to even think of me and include me as the first on your book tour.
Very first.
And thank you for the beautiful letter you sent me, the beautiful card, and the beautiful.
Oh, I'm glad you got it.
I did. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you both so much. And of course, feel free to get the book at an independent bookshop in DC. There are some incredible ones, but also those organizations I mentioned as well, whether it's Casa Ruby in DC, Marsha P. Johnson Institute, and the Sylvia Rivera Law Center are really where I want to be directing my shameless plugs to today.
Awesome. Wonderful. Following social media?
Oh, yes, just my name, Eric Cervini with a C.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us, Eric. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, and most of all, thank you for watching.